The day I was fired, I had exactly $19.40 in my checking account. I remember that number because I checked it in the parking lot, sitting in my car, hands still shaking from what had just happened inside that building. $19.40. A 7-year-old daughter waiting for me at the after-school program that charged $10 for every 15 minutes past pickup time. And a termination letter sitting on the passenger seat next to me that used the phrase, violation of company expense policy, to explain why 12 years of my life had just been handed back to me in a manila envelope. The reason they fired me. $5. A $5 coffee I had expensed after an emergency client meeting that my boss had called me into with 20 minutes notice on a Saturday morning. That was it. That was the whole story, or at least, that was his version of it. My name is Claire Donovan, and I need to tell you what really happened. I had been with Hartwell and Associates for 12 years. 12 years of quarterly reviews that always came back exceptional. 12 years of client accounts that never fell apart on my watch. 12 years of early mornings, late nights, weekend calls, and holidays spent half present because my laptop was always open somewhere nearby. I was a senior client relations manager, which is a title that sounds important and mostly means you are the person everyone calls when something is about to go wrong and needs to quietly go right again. I was also a single mother. Had been since my daughter Maya was 2 years old, when her father decided that the life we had built together was not the life he wanted anymore and walked out on a Tuesday evening while she was sleeping. I do not say that for sympathy. I say it because it is the context for everything, for why I worked the way I worked, for why I gave so much of myself to that job, for why losing it felt like the floor had disappeared from under both of us at once. Maya was 7 when this happened. 2nd grade. She had her mother's stubbornness and her own particular brand of fearlessness that I admired in ways I could never quite say out loud without crying. She collected rocks. She had opinions about everything. She once told her teacher that bees were more important than people and had the scientific reasoning to back it up. She was the best person I knew, and everything I did so that her life could be steady in ways that mine sometimes was not. My boss was a man named Gregory Marsh, Director of Client Services. He had been at Hartwell for about 4 years when I was fired, which meant I had been there 8 years before he even walked through the door. Gregory was the kind of man who wore his authority like a coat 2 sizes too big. Loud in meetings, quiet in accountability. He had a habit of rephrasing other people's ideas back to leadership as though he had just invented them, and a particular talent for being present for every success and mysteriously absent for every crisis. I had managed to build a respectful, professional relationship with Gregory by doing what I always did. I made him look good. I kept my accounts clean, my clients happy, and my complaints to myself. I was not naive about the dynamic. I understood it. And for a long time, that understanding felt like enough. But something had shifted in the months before my termination. I could feel it the way you feel a change in weather before you can actually see the clouds. Gregory had started reassigning some of my higher-profile accounts without explanation. He stopped including me in certain planning meetings I had always been part of. When I raised concerns about a client strategy I thought was heading in the wrong direction, he thanked me for my input in a tone that made very clear my input was not actually welcome. I told myself I was reading too much into it. I told myself that I had 12 years of goodwill in that building, and that was worth something. I told myself to keep my head down, keep delivering, and trust that the work would speak for itself. I should have listened to what the silence was already saying the Saturday morning it happened. My phone rang at 7:42. Maya was still asleep. I was on my 2nd cup of coffee, still in the quiet part of the morning that I protected fiercely, because it was the only part of the day that was fully mine. Gregory's name on the screen immediately dissolved all of that. He needed me to come in. There was a situation with the Caldwell account, one of our largest, and the client had requested a face-to-face meeting that morning to address some concerns. He said there was no one else available who knew the account well enough. He said it would not take long. I called my neighbor Sandra to watch Maya, got dressed, and drove 40 minutes to the office on a Saturday morning. The Caldwell meeting lasted 2 hours. I handled it well. I always handled things well. The client left satisfied. Gregory walked him out, shook his hand, and came back smiling. On my way out, I stopped at the building's coffee cart in the lobby, the one that had been there for years that everyone on our floor used regularly. I bought a coffee, $4.80. I had not eaten breakfast. It was nearly noon. I submitted it as a reimbursement with my notes from the Caldwell meeting attached. The following Thursday, I was called into HR. There were two people in that room, the HR director, a woman named Patricia who I had always liked, and Gregory, who was sitting with his hands folded on the table like he was chairing a board meeting. Patricia had a printed copy of my expense report in front of her. Gregory had a folder. The folder made my stomach drop before anyone said a word. Patricia explained that my reimbursement request had been flagged because I had not obtained pre-authorization for the expense before submitting it. I told her, calmly, because I was always calm in these rooms, that pre-authorization for amounts under $20 had never been required in our department, that everyone submitted small incidentals without prior sign-off, that I had been doing it for 12 years without a single flag. Gregory cleared his throat. He said that the policy had actually been updated in the internal compliance memo distributed 3 months prior, and that as a senior staff member, I should have been aware of the change. I asked to see the memo. He slid it across the table. I had never seen it before. It had not been discussed in any team meeting I attended. But it existed, it had a date, and my name was on the distribution list. Patricia told me that given the policy violation, they were required to issue a formal warning. Then Gregory spoke again. He said that given my seniority and the standard of conduct expected at my level, and given certain other performance considerations, he actually used the phrase other performance considerations without specifying a single one. The decision had been made to move straight to termination. I looked at Patricia. She did not look back at me directly. That was when I understood that this meeting had been decided before I walked into it. I drove home in a silence so complete it felt like pressure against my ears. I picked up Maya from Sandra's house and held her a little longer than usual when she ran to the door. She could feel something was wrong. Children always can, but she did not ask, and I did not tell her. Not yet. I waited until she was asleep that night, and then I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea that went cold, and I let myself feel the full weight of what had just happened. The shock came first. Then the humiliation. Then something quieter and darker underneath both of those, the beginning of understanding. Because sitting there in that kitchen, 12 years of small moments started rearranging themselves into a pattern I had refused to see while I was inside it. The account reassignments, the excluded meetings, the compliance memo I had never received, Gregory's folder, already prepared, already waiting. This was not about $5. This had never been about $5. And somewhere around 2 in the morning, the grief finished its first wave and the anger arrived. Clean, cold, and absolutely certain. I was done being the person who kept her head down and trusted the work to speak for itself. It was time to let something else do the talking. The first thing I did was call an employment attorney. I know that sounds like the beginning of a long, expensive battle, and I want to be honest. I was terrified about the cost, about the time, about what it meant to go up against a company like Hartwell with $19 in my account and a second grader who needed lunch money. But I had spent enough years managing risk professionally to know that the way Gregory had run that termination meeting was not clean. The selective enforcement of a policy I had never been properly notified of, applied exclusively to me after a pattern of being quietly sidelined. That was a story with enough threads to pull. My attorney, a woman named Denise Park, who I found through a referral from a former colleague, agreed. She was sharp, direct, and completely unimpressed by the folder Gregory had built. She told me that what mattered was the pattern, and that patterns leave records if you know where to look. We started looking. The expense reports were the first place Denise went. She filed a formal request for the complete departmental expense records for the prior 18 months as part of the pre-litigation discovery process. Hartwell's legal team responded the way corporate legal teams usually do, slowly, technically, buying time. But they had to respond. And when the records came back, what was inside them was more than I had hoped for. Gregory Marsh had submitted expense reimbursements totaling just over $11,000 in the prior year. None of them had been pre-authorized under the policy he had used to terminate me. There were client dinners with no client names attached. There were 2 conference registrations for events that had occurred on dates when Gregory was, according to his own calendar records, on personal vacation. There were recurring charges at a restaurant near the office that appeared on the books as team lunches. On dates when, according to building access logs Denise subpoenaed separately, Gregory had not been in the building, and neither had anyone else from our team. He had built a policy violation case against me using a rule he himself had never followed a single time. While Denise was building the legal case, something else was happening that I had no control over and did not anticipate. The Caldwell account, the one I had driven in on a Saturday morning to save, began to deteriorate. The client's concerns that I had addressed in that meeting resurfaced a few weeks later because the follow-through on the commitments made in the room had not happened. The person Gregory had assigned to replace me on the account did not have the history with the client that I did. The relationship had taken me 3 years to build, and it came apart in about 6 weeks. The Caldwell Group managed a portfolio of business that represented nearly 8% of Hartwell's regional revenue. When they formally notified Hartwell that they were transitioning their account to another firm, I was told later that the executive meeting that followed was not a quiet one. Hartwell's leadership, now asking uncomfortable questions about how a 12-year senior employee had been terminated weeks before a flagship account walked, began pulling on threads of their own. Gregory's expense records became relevant to that investigation in ways that had nothing to do with me. His folder full of compliance concerns started looking a great deal less impressive when placed next to 430 pages of his own undocumented reimbursements. Gregory was placed on administrative review in the same month that Hartwell's legal team reached out to Denise to discuss early settlement. The timing was not subtle. I want to tell you exactly what the settlement was, and I cannot. The agreement included a confidentiality clause, as they usually do. What I can tell you is that Maya's college fund now exists. What I can tell you is that I paid off the debt I had been quietly carrying for 3 years without telling anyone. What I can tell you is that I sat in Denise's office the afternoon the paperwork was finalized and cried in a way I had not let myself cry since the kitchen table the night I was fired. Except this time it was not grief. It was something I did not have a clean word for, the release of something that had been held tightly for a very long time. Gregory Marsh resigned from Hartwell 2 months after his administrative review began. The company posted his position internally the same week. I heard through former colleagues that he had landed somewhere smaller, a mid-size firm on the other side of the city. I hope he does well there. I mean that sincerely and also with the full awareness that it might sound strange after everything I just told you. But here is the thing. I did not set out to destroy Gregory Marsh. I set out to make sure that what he did to me was not something that simply disappeared into the quiet machinery of corporate life, filed away and forgotten like an expense report that nobody checked. What I wanted was the truth to be visible. And it was. As for me, I started my own client relations consultancy 8 months after the settlement. Small, focused, built on the relationships I had spent 12 years cultivating with people who valued how I worked and had noticed, quietly, what had happened to me. My first 3 clients came from referrals within the first month. The Caldwell Group, yes, that Caldwell Group, reached out in the second month. We had a conversation over coffee that lasted 3 hours, and at the end of it their director said something I have thought about many times since. He said, "We always knew the account was really yours. We just did not know how to say that while you were still inside the building. I am outside the building now, and everything looks different from out here." Maya knows a version of this story, the version appropriate for a 7-year-old, which involves the broad strokes of Mama had a job that was not fair to her, and now Mama has a better one. She accepted this information with the same calm certainty she brings to everything, and then asked if she could have a snack. I told her yes. I watched her walk back to her rock collection, and I felt something settle inside me that I do not think had been settled in a very long time. I think about the women who do not have a Denise, who do not have 12 years of client relationships to fall back on, who do not have a neighbor like Sandra willing to watch a child on short notice, so their mother can drive 40 minutes to save a Saturday meeting for a boss who is already planning to erase her. I think about what happens to them, and I feel the anger again, but quieter now, the kind that moves toward something rather than just burning. I am careful, these days, about the rooms I walk into, about the meetings where something feels slightly wrong, but I cannot name it yet. I have learned to trust that feeling, the one I kept overwriting for years because the alternative seemed too costly. I have learned that the cost of ignoring it is always higher than you think, and it almost never lands only on you. There is a lesson I keep coming back to, and it is this. The people who use small rules as weapons almost always do so because they cannot afford for you to look too closely at how they follow those same rules themselves. The policy is never really the point. The policy is just the door. And doors, it turns out, open in both directions. I was fired over $5. $5 and a compliance memo I was never properly given. And that $5 unlocked a paper trail worth $11,000, a legal case worth significantly more, the departure of the man who built the case against me, and the return of the client account that had been the whole reason I drove in on that Saturday morning in the first place. I think about that sometimes when things feel disproportionate or pointless or unjust. I think about how something so small can be the thing that finally makes everything visible. Not because the universe is tidy or fair or working some grand plan, but because the truth was already there. It was always there. It just needed the right moment to stop being quiet. Maya still has every rock in her collection. She added a new one last week, a piece of quartz she found at the park, white and slightly pink at one edge. She held it up to the light in the car on the way home and said, "Mama, look, it has something inside it." Yeah, baby, most things do. You just have to hold them up to the light long enough to see it.